In 1981, a man stood in the middle of the Mojave Desert. Before him stretched a dried-up lake bed, silent and empty. But in his mind, it looked completely different. He saw a spaceport, a place where private rockets would take off. The world called him crazy. The government didn't care. The aerospace industry laughed. But Burt Rutan didn't care what they thought. He wasn't chasing fame or fortune. He was chasing an idea, one that would flip everything we knew about spaceflight on its head. Burt Rutan was never a typical engineer. While others followed the rules, he questioned whether the rules made sense at all. Growing up in California, he was obsessed with airplanes. As a child, he built balsa wood models. As a teenager, he earned his pilot's license before he was even legally allowed to drive a car. After studying aeronautical engineering, he worked for the Air Force, but the bureaucracy drove him nuts. He wanted freedom. So in the 1970s, he left and moved to the Mojave Desert, where he started designing planes in a leaky hangar. No metal, he used foam and fiberglass. No standard shapes, he drew up wild, unconventional forms. People thought his designs looked ridiculous, until they saw them fly. His major breakthrough came in 1984 when he designed the Voyager. It looked delicate, almost fragile, with absurdly long wings. Critics said it would break apart in flight. But in 1986, Voyager became the first airplane to fly around the world nonstop, without refueling. Over 42,000 kilometers, more than 9 days in the air, no landings. It was a triumph of precision and radical thinking. And Burt wasn't done. In the early 2000s, the idea of commercial spaceflight was a joke. Space was something for governments, not hobbyists. But Peter Diamandis didn't think so. He announced the Ansari X Prize, $10 million for the first private team to launch a manned spacecraft into space, twice within 2 weeks. Most experts rolled their eyes, but not Burt Rutan. For him, this wasn't about the prize money, it was about the challenge, the chance to prove that space travel could be done cheaper, faster, smarter. He called Paul Allen, Microsoft's co-founder, and pitched him a bold idea. A rocket plane, launched from a carrier aircraft, built with lightweight materials and capable of flying to space and back, twice. Allen said yes. And so, in that same desert, Burt's team at Scaled Composites began building SpaceShipOne. No billion-dollar facilities, just foam, glue, old computers, and the conviction that it could work. The spacecraft looked nothing like anything NASA ever built. It was stubby and strange, almost insect-like. It wouldn't launch from the ground, but would be carried to high altitude by a mothership named White Knight, then released to fire its rocket and shoot into space. Every flight was a risk. Pilots blacked out under intense G-forces. Test flights spun out of control. They failed, learned, improved. The team kept refining, kept flying. On June 21, 2004, they were ready. SpaceShipOne was carried high into the sky by White Knight. In the pilot's seat was Mike Melville. At 15 kilometers, he was released. He ignited the rocket. In seconds, he was blasted upward. The sky darkened. The craft shook. And then, weightlessness. At 100.1 kilometers above Earth, just past the boundary of space, Melville floated. He looked out at the curve of the planet, silent and still. A few minutes later, he began descent. Thanks to a feathering system Burt had invented, where the wings rotated upward to create drag, the spacecraft glided safely back to Earth. But the job wasn't done. The prize required a second flight within 2 weeks. On October 4, 2004, pilot Brian Binney took SpaceShipOne up again. Same process, same altitude, same success. They won the $10 million. But the real victory was psychological. They had proven that space wasn't off limits to private citizens anymore. SpaceShipOne never flew again. It wasn't meant to be a commercial vehicle. It was a statement, a proof of concept. Virgin Galactic licensed the design. Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, watching from the sidelines, accelerated their own space efforts. The once government-only space industry suddenly had competition. Burt Rutan didn't stay in the spotlight. In 2011, he quietly retired. He didn't want to run a company or build a tourist empire. He just wanted to invent, to sketch, to tinker. That was his joy. But his influence spread. Startups followed his example. Engineers who once thought they needed permission realized they could start on their own. Space, for the first time in decades, felt exciting again. Open, wild, unpredictable. This isn't really a story about technology. It's a story about belief, about someone who heard no at every step and built anyway, who didn't wait for approval and didn't stop when others laughed. Burt Rutan showed that the future doesn't always come from the center. Sometimes it begins on the edge of a desert, in the hands of someone willing to try. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Change doesn't need permission. It just needs one person with a wild idea and the guts to see it through.